In this video, I'm going to give you my top 3 tips for creating compelling photographs that I've learned after being a professional photographer for 13 years. Hi everyone, I'm Martin Castine. I'm a portrait and landscape photographer and former wedding photographer living in London. In my time, I've had to use various different ideas to create compelling images, so I thought in this video, I would share some of them with you. My first tip for you is to create a compelling mood or atmosphere in your image. When we create an image with mood and atmosphere in it, our viewer will feel something when they look at that picture. They'll want to stop and examine it. Everything in the picture has to come together. As you can see in this picture, I specifically chose nighttime, so it's dark, and raining, so we get these reflections on the floor. This creates this mood and atmosphere in this picture. So you can do this by working in a way where you bring those ideas together beforehand. You should have a clear idea before you take a picture. It doesn't matter whether it's a landscape or a portrait or whatever you're shooting, you should be thinking to yourself, what am I trying to make here? So for instance, if we have a rainy day and we're shooting on that rainy day, we're going to have lots of greys and blues. So it's probably a good idea that our model wears something like that. Like in this picture, I've got my model to wear some clothing that's going to match those grey and blue tones on a rainy day. And then I'm going to get her to pose in a way that matches that. But I could go the opposite way. Do you remember that song Singing in the Rain, where they're dancing in the rain and they're happy about it? That could be another alternative road that you go down. I might go for something like in this picture here, where I've gone for intensity, which is in a tunnel area. So this is filtering the light from the front. So that helps the intensity because she's staring straight back into that light, straight into the camera. She's face on. She's got this bright red coat on. This creates that mood and that atmosphere, all of these things working together. Let's say you're working on a landscape. You might want to have something that's more storytelling, something that pushes more towards fairy tale. In this picture that I did in Glen Cove with this deer in the front, I'm including an awful lot of the background and having a good chunk of it in focus as well, because this feels more like a painting. This is more painterly because I'm layering the elements in the picture. That's helping add to the overall mood. I have several different things that combine together. There's the mountains in the background, there's the trees and the waterways, and then you've got the deer in the foreground. So we want to make sure that those elements exist in our picture. So I have to move myself around because I'm thinking in my mind, I want to create a picture that has these multiple elements in, like we used to see in old paintings. So I'm not just going to isolate, because often we see with pictures of deer, we see just the deer and a blurry background, which can look absolutely beautiful in its own way. It's just that's a different idea to this. So remember, the next time you're thinking about your next photo shoot, or you arrive at a location and you're not quite sure what to do with it, think about what mood and atmosphere can you try to create in your pictures. My next tip for you is compelling lighting. Lighting makes all the difference in our work. I'm going to talk to you about 3 different types of lighting here that will make a big difference to what you're doing. The first one is side lighting, and I'm going to cover it for landscape and portrait. With side lighting, we're able to capture all of the texture and the dimension in a landscape or on the person. It looks very dramatic. A side light hits all of the surfaces and creates a very 3-dimensional looking image. In this landscape photo, this was taken at a time of day when it was actually still quite bright. Although the sun was just starting to go down, it was far too bright to shoot into the sun. And if the sun would be behind me and I would be front lighting anything that I'm taking pictures of, it would look really flat and boring. But at that time of day, using the light as a side light changes everything, because it picks out all of the features in the rocks in the mountains, in the trees, and it feels as if the light is sweeping across the ground. Side lighting in portraiture as well can be really interesting. You may have to play around with full light to make sure that you're getting enough lighting in, but using the side lighting can create dramatic and intense portraits. I love to use side lighting like this because it just feels very expressive and very painterly. The next type of lighting, which I think is a little bit misunderstood, and I'm going to give you a tip with this, is backlighting. Often when people think about backlight, they feel like the light has to be literally behind the subject. But that's not the case. With backlighting, we simply want the light to be somewhere in the background behind our subject, but it can be quite far off to the side. It can be diagonally off to the side. Anything like this picture I've got of Lisa here. she's diagonally backlit. This works really well. We get some of the benefits then of the side lighting because it's slightly diagonal, but overall we would call this a backlit photograph. Backlit photographs don't have quite the intensity of side lit photographs. What they lose slightly in dimension and shaping, they gain in terms of drama. Like in this picture of Ellie, these lights behind her are simply construction lights on a building site. When I use these construction lights as a backlight, it creates all this atmosphere. It's a much more romantic style, especially in landscapes. When we have a backlit picture, everything comes together in a really nice way. You'll create compelling images that people will want to look at. But it's just really important to remember that doesn't mean you have to have the sun in the photograph. The sun can be diagonally off to the side or just out of frame, and you can still get a really nice backlit picture like that. I have editing workshops on my website for portraiture and landscape photography if you want to check out the links in the description down below. The other case that I use sometimes, but it's hard to use, is front lighting. But front lighting, when it's done well, can really illuminate our subject well. Again, when we're lighting from the front, it doesn't have to be directly from the front. You notice I haven't mentioned the 45-degree standard angle because I don't want to mention something to you guys that you absolutely know and seems obvious. But front lighting means the light's coming from at least this kind of angle coming in. So it's much more direct and sharper, hitting the model or the subjects from the front. And if we can use a background that's darker and has maybe other lighting sources in the background, that can bring out the kind of depth again that we need. But you have to be careful with front lighting because it can look really stuck on and flat if you're not careful. And that is why I often try to avoid direct on camera flash, because we can often end up with that look. But when front lighting is done well, it can be really nice. And in these pictures that I showed you earlier, these two pictures actually use front lighting. And you notice in these two pictures that you can really see the model's face very well. But one thing I will mention in this picture of Amber that I took is that here I use the wall on the left hand side, this wooden wall, because it's really dark. I use this as negative fill with front light. So the lighting is coming from behind me. It's just the clouds in the sky, but the sun is in that direction. So it's predominantly coming from behind me as I take the photograph of her. But I put her up against this wall, which is dark. And what that creates is an area where the light's not reflecting back in. It's actually being subtracted. So you see you have this darker edge on one side of the face, and that helps bring back in some shape and some dimension into this photograph. Likewise, in this picture that I did of Hannah here, she was actually down at the bottom of some steps. So the light is in front of her, but it's above as well. So it's cutting slightly downwards on her face. And that's just creating a little bit more shape to the portrait. So you have to pay attention with front lighting as to what angle that light's coming in at. It's really making a lot of difference, because if the light's just literally from the camera, that's harder to work with. But if it's slightly above, that can look really good. Or if the light's ever so slightly from the side, that can look really good. It's just having it off that absolute center axis is a really good tip. So use front lighting when you want to show your model or subject really clearly, but try to make sure that it has just some sort of slight angle to it. And if you really need to add some more shape, remember to add something that's dark on one side or the other of your subject, and that will create a little bit of negative fill that will just bring some of that shape back. Now, here's a comparison of these lighting angles I was just talking about, but it's really important to understand this isn't just for portraiture, because in the end, light is light. So it doesn't really matter whether you're using natural light or if you're using a flash, or what your subject is or what you shoot. These same principles will always be true. What you see in these three pictures here and the way they're lit will be true whether it's an animal or a mountain or a car. It really doesn't make any difference in that regard. Now, we've covered a fair bit in this video so far, but you might be thinking to yourself, how do I bring all of this together? How do I actually apply it to a photo that I'm taking, whatever style of photography that is that you do? The message that I'd like you to take with you is that the pre-visualization and planning that goes into a photograph makes the world of difference. When it comes to your photography, I would often recommend that people start, like this video did, with atmosphere and mood that you're trying to create, because from that, everything else starts to fall into place. Once we know the kind of mood that we're going for in a picture, we can usually then start deciding on the lighting, the coloring, whether we're going to go for black and white. All of the different decisions that we have to make should come into effect from the mood and the atmosphere that we're trying to create in the first place. Now, this works for street photography as well. It works for really every genre of photography, I think. Maybe not for sports, but for pretty much everything. Any photography where you have some control over what's happening in front of you, even if that means waiting in the spot for the exact moment to occur that you're looking for. That's a world away from just walking around taking pictures of buses and things. These are the things that separate an okay photographer from a good photographer. And when people see those types of pictures, it leaves them thinking, how did they make that? Why can't I do that with my camera? And it was nothing to do with the camera. As I always say in my channel, the gear is really just not that important. To a degree it is, but like mostly it isn't. Because it's your mind and the ideas that you come up with, the concepts that you create and how you go about executing them and making your vision a reality. That is what makes compelling photographs. And that is what separates people from being just okay and being a good photographer. And if you want to know what my most used portrait lens is, then check out this video here.